Rise of Kingdoms has just announced their newest commander coming to the game, Belisarius Prime. And I can say super confidently, he is probably better than any other commander, like for the whole entire cavalry tree. He is just absolutely insane. The debuff he is bringing to the game, something we've never seen before, that will literally shape the open field for the foreseeable future. So if you want to know all about Belisarius' Prime skills, his possible pairs, his possible best talents, and when I think he may be releasing, you need to stick around till the end of today's video. Now let's start off today's video by going into the juicy part of this new commander, his skills. Now here is Belisarius' active skill, and this is probably the most impactful thing in his whole entire kit. It is a single target skill with a rage requirement of 1000. In this skill, he deals direct damage to a target troop, damage factor 2400, that is really good, pretty much on the meta. And then for the next 2 seconds, the target loses 50 rage per second. That is just all in and of itself a pretty good debuff, because the way it works is he's going to make the target lose rage and it's going to be harder to throw his active skill. The second part of his active skill, though, actually the third part, and this is probably the most powerful, is if the target is surrounded, the target is inflicted with the deception effect for 5 seconds. Bracket, its active skill requires 200 more rage to use. That line in and of itself is just the most insane thing I think we've seen ever in Rise of Kingdoms, because not only is Belisarius reducing the rage the target gets, he's putting a debuff onto the target which is going to make your active skill much more expensive to throw. So for example, if you have a commander with a rage requirement of 1000 like Zhulang, it's going to be a 1200 rage requirement with this debuff. And it's not like a 3-second debuff, it's 5 seconds. That is a really long debuff. Pretty much by modern standards with Rise of Kingdoms, most debuffs are 3 seconds, but this deception effect will last 5 seconds, which is just going to be very powerful. And since open field situation, it's all about going and hitting the target and running, hitting and running. This debuff is pretty much going to make a march way more difficult to run, especially if it gets hit while being surrounded. So this is going to make Belisarius one of the strongest debuffing and support cavalry commanders really we've ever seen. Now here is Belisarius' second skill, and this is kind of a stat skill. He gains 30% attack, which is decent, and 20% march speed. I mean, those are pretty good for cavalry units. The attack, just an average amount. The march speed, pretty nice. I mean, you're pretty much going to be able to catch almost anybody on the open field with that march speed. The next thing here though, whenever he exits combat, cavalry units in his troop will gain 60% march speed for 5 seconds. Once again, fairly decent, not really too impactful when you're exiting combat. I think the only time you'll notice this march speed really useful is when you're exiting combat and trying to hit an opponent, or when someone's trying to escape from you. So it's going to be much harder to escape a Belisarius Prime, because the second you do exit combat, he's just going to speed up and catch you again. So it's going to be kind of a cycle with you trying to get away and then him just chasing you down and probably dealing a ton of damage. So definitely something that is quite impactful on his kit, but when you look at it in a normal open field situation, it won't be too overpowered. As for Belisarius' third skill, this commander's cavalry units gain 25% defense. I mean, that's above average by about 5%, so that's pretty good. And while this commander's troop is on the map, whenever it launches a basic attack, 10% chance to deal extra direct damage to the target, damage factor 500, cooldown 5 seconds. I mean, this is, once again, a fairly solid skill. It's probably better than his second skill up here, just because you're getting a good amount of defense. Not to mention, the 10% chance to deal 500 damage is actually pretty nice. By most commanders nowadays, 10% chance, 500 instant damage, it is up there with some of the better amounts of instant damage in the game. Obviously, not game-breaking. You've got commanders like Alex who deal more, but nonetheless, that is still a fairly impactful amount of damage, and it will definitely shift your trades quite a bit. But it is not the highest. We know commanders who have much higher instant damage, but then again, just for a third skill, just as a bonus thing right there, it is pretty nice. Now, as for Belisarius' fourth skill, this skill is another pretty good skill. It's going to make him take 10% less skill damage, which is all around nice nowadays. It means commanders like Herman and commanders like Zhulang won't be able to hurt him as much, and I think it's also there to kind of counter Herman's poison debuff, because really, most open field fights, you're going to get one skill cycle on the opponent. Herman's single skill cycle gives them around a 6 to 9% skill damage increase, so this kind of counteracts Herman. And then also, if this commander's troop is attacking another troop on the map, which means really anything besides barbarians, the target troop has less than 80% units remaining, this commander's troop deals 30% more skill damage. I mean, this is basically just a way to counter Boudica, because she's got the defense that comes when she goes below 80% units. So this is once again a fairly good skill, and overall is going to make you deal a lot of instant, just single target damage to an archer troop you're targeting, and I can see how it's really there to counter commanders like Boudica Prime and like Herman, who are still fairly strong archer commanders. Boudica probably will lose a lot of value once Belisarius does come out, especially with this last part of his 4th skill. This is also just really good though on any opponents because of how much damage you can deal when they're below 80% units. So not only are they already a little bit weaker, you're dealing even more damage, which will just make you much stronger. Now, as for Belisarius' expertise, he is the only little bit of real anti-swarm in his kit, and it is if the current target of this commander's troop is surrounded, increase the target's damage received based on the number of troops surrounding it. I think this is actually a debuff as long as Belisarius is hitting a target, so that's a unique form of a debuff. Usually we see them with a timer. This is whenever he's being surrounded and hitting someone, they're going to be receiving this debuff, which is pretty good. I mean, it's up to a 12% increase in all damage, and if you're tanking a Belisarius and he's about to die, he can give you a little bit of final value and allow your other marchers to get a few more kills, or maybe even take out a march completely, because 12% more all damage is actually relatively high. So now that we've seen all of Belisarius' kit, what do I really think about his skills? Well, I think the most important thing is easily this active skill debuff. The deception effect is probably one of the more insane things we've seen in a while. It is arguably better than Herman's poison debuff just because of how much it can weaken a march or make that march way harder to use in a normal open field fight. I'm even just inflicting this on someone and just running away after, they're just way harder to throw their active skill, which improves everything around you. Not only your murder ball, but it improves your kingdom's murder ball, it makes your opponents deal less damage. I mean, everything about this active skill is just absolutely amazing, and probably one of the better skills we've seen in a while, especially with that debuff. It's certainly an upgrade over someone like Hao Bing, who, despite having really good single target damage, really doesn't have any form of a debuff. The other skill I'd say is really important on Belisarius is probably that 4th skill right there. So getting the 1st skill and the 4th skill max is going to leave you in a good position, especially since this 4th skill is really there to target archer units, and it's going to allow him to perform his role in that situation a lot better. Overall, I think I can say though, Belisarius' kit is pretty strong, and if you do end up investing in him, you'll be in a pretty good position. As for other skills, I mean, his 2nd skill, his 3rd skill, even his 4th skill, they're all pretty good skills, but I still think the 4th and active skill are probably the better two, but this is a fairly decent skill here, the 2nd one. March speed, like I said, can help you chase down opponents, and then to the last man over here is also a pretty good skill, especially with the cav defense, which is probably some of the bigger amounts of stats that he does gain. You will notice though, pretty much in his whole entire kit, there is no anti-swarm. So Belisarius is clearly a very glass cannon commander, which means I think Nevsky will be staying in the meta. Joan will probably stay in the meta because Belisarius doesn't have AoE, and he could, oddly enough, be a replacement to a Hao Bing, or he could be a replacement to a William, depending on your murder ball. Now, as for Belisarius' best pairings, well, I think the first one that is very obvious would be Hao Bing, and there's a reason this could be one of, if not his best pairing, and there's actually really 2 reasons. First of all, we've seen how good Hao Bing performs with Nevsky, and Nevsky, while he is more of a tanky commander, and Hao Bing is a not so tanky commander, I think because of Hao Bing's faster rage cycle and being able to outrage your opponents, it's going to allow you to get Belisarius' active skill probably off a little bit quicker before your opponents, which means they're going to have to wait even longer to deal that skill damage to you. So since Hao Bing gets 150 rage cost reduction, plus has this skill tree, and if you throw a Horn of Fury in there, you'll pretty much rage faster than anyone in the game. So a Hao Bing with a Belisarius will pretty much allow you to make your opponents not throw an active skill. It's almost like a prolonged silence with how strong it could be. That being said, because Hao Bing is not tanky and Belisarius is not tanky, this march could struggle quite a bit, but Hao Bing does have a pretty nice amount of march speed that he gains outside of territory, which could allow him to get away from some tough situations. Nevsky is also, another pretty good pairing we could predict, just because Nevsky is a very tanky, single-target oriented commander, and then maybe you'd move your Joan down to your Hao Bing, you'd run Hao Bing Joan, and Nevsky with Belisarius Prime. That's certainly possible, just because of the tankiness. That being said, I do think William would probably be the one to replace in the meta pool, just because if you've got Hao-Che-Bing, his damage is too good. If you've got Nevsky, he's too tanky, and Jones' AoE is just too strong. So really, William is probably the most replaceable out of all the commanders. So that means I think William will probably fall out of the meta after this update. But I'll be interested to see where Belisarius' pairs do end up. I don't think he'll be a primary. I mean, the mobility tree is not good. I don't even think there's a single legendary commander. There's one. It's Jadwiga. I mean, mobility is just not going to really help you. It's really all just about march speed. So Belisarius, I doubt he'll be a primary. He's probably going to be a secondary. And in my opinion, I think his best pairing, just from these early looks, will probably be with Hao-Che-Bing, since he's going to outrage your opponents and get that massive debuff on them. As for investment potential, well, I think he's got some pretty interesting potential with that debuff, but I don't know if he's actually going to be a number one cav investment. Even though he has one of the better debuffs in the game, he doesn't have anything that's really amazing in terms of tankiness, so I think that Nevsky will probably still remain as your first pickup for a cavalry commander, and then maybe even Joan, just because Belisarius is a single target commander, because Belisarius clearly is more of a secondary, Nevsky is definitely a primary, Joan definitely a secondary, and I think as a first march, especially for most cav players, Nevsky Joan, just because of the AoE damage, because of Nevsky's tankiness, is going to be much more forgiving than having a Belisarius, which you couldn't really benefit from, since you can't use any of your other marches to get that surrounded effect on your opponent. So as a first only march, really, I don't think Belisarius will be in the meta for a lot of newer players, but if you're running 2, 3, 4, 5 marches, he's definitely up there, and I think once you get a Hao-Che-Bing, or if you already have a Hao-Che-Bing, he's going to be probably the best secondary to Hao-Che-Bing, replacing that William. And even though you are losing the support that William does give, like increasing your rage and your defense, you are gaining that insane debuff, which in my opinion, kind of supports you even more than the buffs that William does give you. Now, as for Belisarius' talent build, I think there's really only one option, because we know he has the versatility tree and he will be an open field commander. You probably want to just go all in on the cav tree, since the mobility tree is like, it's really bad. I mean, there's nothing in here that's particularly good besides save and cross, because it can allow you to take 9% less of all skill damage, so that's pretty nice. But other than that, the cav tree is just the best way to go, because it's actually going to allow you to do stuff on the open field, like dealing more damage, or even just taking a little bit less skill damage. So overall, this is probably the best build I'd go for. Swiftness is actually an underrated skill in my opinion, because whenever you take skill damage, you're going to be able to run quicker, and that means if you are taking skill damage while you're running away, which is definitely possible, you should be able to escape most opponents fairly quickly, since you'll get that nice march speed boost. Other than that, I think these other two skills here, Vortex and Lightning Charge, are pretty useless, but you don't have a better option. And then when you look at Spiked Armor, it's your other really okay skill, allowing you to deal 1.5% more counterattack damage of all types. So Spiked Armor, Saving Cross, and Swiftness are your two better skills there. Maybe you can work towards Alacrity, but in my opinion, really the slow effect is a very rare thing you receive on the open field, and the 10% chance to negate it, it's just too small for it to really be impactful. I think when it's max, it's probably going to be like a 30%, but still, once again, not a very impactful skill. So you're kind of left with bad talents, which is why I think Belisarius is looking more of a secondary commander rather than a primary commander. But if you did run him as a primary, maybe that ends up being the case. This is the build I would go for. Now, as for things like release date expectations and where do I think he'll be available, well, first of all, we don't know his exact release date. Nothing has come out about it. We don't even know the second commander that will be coming out, if there is one, and there probably is. I'm going to say, though, that Belisarius will release in around a month's time. Usually, once Lilith announces a commander, it comes out about a month later, and Belisarius, since he has the versatility tree, we can almost guarantee he's going to be for the open field, and that means he's going to be a Wheel of Fortune commander. He's definitely not going to be in the Mightiest Governor, just because Mightiest Governor is really only for rally commanders, and there are almost no open field commanders that are available in it besides Genghis Khan, but that's a weird story on how he ended up there. So most of the commanders, or if not all of them, that are an open field commander are available in the Wheel of Fortune and not the Mightiest Governor. Now, if you made it to the end of today's video, I'm curious to hear what are your speculations about the new commander. I think Belisarius will have his place in the open field, but I don't know if he will be the best cav commander. While he does have really good damage and he does have really good debuffs, he is extremely not tanky. I mean, he's super easy to just kill. So what do you guys think about Belisarius Prime? Will you be investing in him? Are you just going to wait and see where it goes? Or do you just think he's going to be another commander similar to Hao-Che, being a little bit niche but definitely very strong? I'm definitely curious to hear what you guys think, and do let me know down below in the comments. I read every single one. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.